why should we? I think it's ridiculous. And this country shouldn't be raising taxes. We ought to be lowering taxes. We should have a surplus, not a deficit. Because the kind of money that I'm talking about, and you can call them, as the gentleman before said, you can call it a tax, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But those countries should be paying us major billions of dollars, and you won't have any deficits whatsoever, and then we'll be able to help the poor and the sick and the homeless and the farmers and everybody else.
Trump's long game, what it means for you and what it means for your money in 2025. So you'll find this fascinating, but back in 1987, a young Donald Trump gave an interview on the terrace with Larry King. He talked about deregulation, wasteful government, and how to fix the economy. And honestly, it sounds like that could have been given like yesterday, last week, last month, because I'm not so sure Trump has really changed his idea about what his thoughts were about the economy and what his thoughts were about government. But the real question is, was it all just talk, or has he been playing the long game all along, and now we're finally seeing it in 2016 and then again in 2025? So, in that 1987 interview, Trump talks about two big ideas. One, that America is overregulated, all types of overregulation. And second, the fact that big money is leaving the U.S. and needs to come back home. Translation, it needs to be repatriated back to the United States. He also floated what sounded crazy back then. He said, if I ever ran for office, I'd run it like a business. And that whack-a-mole analogy, classic Trump. You fix one problem, another one pops up, but government needs to be flexible and it needs to be focused. So, there's Donald Trump back in 1987 having the same long game mentality that he has right now in 2025. His ideas about government hasn't changed much, if at all. So, whether you love Trump or not, 30 years ago, he wasn't just ranting. He was really giving us a preview of how he'd run government. And so, none of us should be surprised because he's delivering exactly what he said he would do. No surprises at all, I don't think. So, the big question is the playbook working from 1987? Is it working in 2025? Let's check it out, because now it is 2025 and we're seeing echoes of the same old playbook, only now it's policy.
Donald Trump's our guest. This is Larry King Live. We go to Toronto. Hello.
Yes, good evening, Larry. My question for Mr. Trump, it's a two-part question relating to international trade. Is the solution to the American trade deficit to restrict trade through protectionist policies, or to train American business to be more aggressive and entrepreneurial? And I'd also like to know if Mr. Trump would support a Canadian-U.S. free trade agreement.
Well, I think, just to answer your first part, I believe it's very important that you have free trade. But we don't have free trade right now, because if you want to go to Japan or if you want to go to Saudi Arabia or various other countries, it's virtually impossible for an American to do business in those countries. Virtually.
Deregulation in housing and finance. Leadership shakeups at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Pleasure to bring back U.S. manufacturing. And I'm saying not just a pleasure, a ton of pressure to do so. And repatriation of tax breaks back on the table. All of these things are very real, and they're exactly what Trump said he would do 25, 35, 45 years ago. Crazy to think about. So, Trump's team really calls this as part of what's the economic reset. But now, how does it actually affect you? That's the big question. So, if there's a theme, I call it follow the money. And when you play follow the money, sooner or later you come to the conclusion about how all these changes are going to affect you and how it's going to affect your family, your wallet, and maybe the bigger picture of your community and your country. So, here's a personal part. If these policies work, like corporations bring money back, jobs come home, housing stabilizes. But if they backfire, you and I deal with the fallout. Higher mortgage rates, slower wage growth, inflation that eats up our paychecks. That sounds familiar already, doesn't it? But this isn't about politics. It's really all about your money. What happens in DC always ends up at your kitchen table, and that's a fact. So, Doge, like the threats to our economy, maybe they are, maybe they're not. Maybe they're overhyped, maybe they're very real. But one idea that's floating around in policy circles right now is what Chamath called the Doge problem. And Chamath is part of the All In podcast, so kind of a really, really sharp guy. And these are people who kind of take a closer look at what's going on with Trump policy and try to explain and understand it just a little bit more clear. So, Doge is all about ending duplication slash waste in government. O, well, we'd say that that's for like overspending, right? G, government fraud. And there is a lot of truth to government fraud. It's out there. And of course, the abuse of the system. The fact of the matter is, we have a president and we have elected officials inside of the United States, but behind the scenes, there is this bureaucracy that's constantly functioning no matter who's in office. And I think that's a piece that Doge is really taking a closer look at. And it's worth noting that there could be some real breakthroughs in where the dollar goes because Harry Truman back in the day had a sign on his desk that said, "The buck stops here." But in 2025, the buck seems to be everywhere and it seems to be multiplying. And it always comes back to us with getting whacked with debt and taxes. This isn't partisan, it's systemic. And Trump's new team is claiming that they need to stop this abuse and they need to stop it right now. And that's part of what Doge is about. Whether they succeed, that's up to the data. So, if I could share a concept with you, it's called first and second derivative thinking, the bigger picture. And so one thing we don't talk about enough is second order effects. You cut regulations equals a short-term boom, but long-term, maybe you weaken the guardrails that protect regular people. That's part of our government safety net, right? Um, Trump moves may help business scale fast, but what happens if wages stagnate, a housing bubble inflates all over again? This is what economists call derivative problems. It's not just about what happens tomorrow, but it's really some of the secondary and other unintended consequences that come along with some of these moves. That's what we should all pay closer attention to because a lot of times the story sounds really, really good on the surface, but like really what happens when you dig down and take a look at how these other things, the cause and effects that take place, that's a really powerful place for us to be. Particularly when we're talking about how does it affect us, people like us. So here's why it really matters to us. So there's people like us, no matter where you land politically. The fact is that people making economic policy today are shaping the world your family will live in tomorrow. And that's a fact. This isn't about red or blue. It's about making sure that you're informed and not left behind, right? If this helped you think differently, please subscribe. I'm not here to take a political side here. I don't want that whatsoever. Instead, I really want to talk about the things that matter and matter most and hopefully cut through a lot of the fluff that you see in network television. I'm Brian. Click the next story here because the fact is a like and a subscribe will make sure that this is delivered right to your inbox on a regular basis. And I look forward to your comments you're going to leave below. Until then, remember the biggest battle we fight is the one between our ears. Have a great day.